Namco. You know Namco. We all know Namco. They made the Pac-Man game, you know, the one that goes chomp chomp. But we ain't here to talk about Pac-Man. I mean, just look at him. Mans came out in 1980, and you could just tell because if you remove his arms, legs, and his nose, he's just a circle. Only something from 1980 could look so boring. We need something new, something modern, something with dragons, something with tomatoes with goggles! Oh yeah, Dig Dug. Dig Dug came out in 1882. What the fuck? Dig Dug came out in 1982 to immense success, selling over 22,000 arcade cabinets. But how come Dig Dug was so popular? Well, I don't know. So let's talk about it. Dig Dug stars Taizo Hori. Why is his name Taizo Hori rather than something simple like, I don't know, Doug? Well, frankly, I don't really know. His name is actually a play on the Japanese phrase Hore Taizo, meaning I want to dig. But when this character was created, as far as I can tell, he didn't have a name until 2005 when Dig Dug Ding Strike came out. But before that, he was just a normal dude. Didn't even have a name. Poor guy. This might be a little confusing for some of you because Dig Dug sounds like this would be this character's name, with Dug being a name of itself here in the West, but not so much in Japan, where this character originated. The title actually comes from the main aspects of the game, which is, it's digging. So that's where the dig comes from, but what about the dug? Well, it's actually just as simple. Rather than using the present tense dig, it uses the past tense dug, and that's how we got the name, Dig Dug. The game also stars these little tomatoes with eyes and legs called pukas, which is derived from the Japanese onomatopoeia puka puka, which means puffing. There's also these green dragon guys called Figars, which spit fire at you. So of course, to protect yourself, the obvious course of action would be to
pump them full of air until they explode.
And since the Puka Hero is friends with Pac-Man, my headcanon is that Taizo Hero is just a deranged murderer with a vengeance. Oddly enough, as horrific as exploding via air pump is, this game has gotten a significant amount of praise for the cute character designs, which frankly, I'd be lying if I said I disagreed. The designs in general are just absolutely adorable, including the murdering Mr. Hori here, and this is by far my favorite design for the character. The main objective of the game is to remove the lives of the creatures from beneath the surface, which oddly enough, don't do anything until you approach upon their territory and eventually start running away from you, further confirming that you are on a genocide run. Once all the enemies are no longer on screen, whether from inflation or just running away, you start the next level. Despite being relatively simple, the game is a ton of fun and incredibly addictive. I even have all the achievements on Steam. The game is on Switch via the Namco Museum's Arcade Collection Pack, and you can get the arcade game series version on most other platforms, so there's not much excuse to not give it a shot. If not for me, do it for the Puka. Do it for his family that lost him on the genocide run caused by this menace. Dig Dug was so successful that they even made a sequel in 1985, and it was called Dig Dug 2. But rather than digging in a 2D plane, you'd be playing in an overhead view. The goal is still the same, kill all the enemies, except this time, they come after you from the start, seeking revenge for their fallen brothers. You now have two prominent means of attacking. The same imploding of the enemies of the previous game, and now armed with a jackhammer, can make entire
islands fall apart,
ending any insignificant lives that may have taken shelter there. Dig Dug 2 is actually the game that I remember playing most as a kid, despite most people being more familiar with the first game. I never got a chance to play it until recently. I had Namco Museum DS as a kid, in fact I still have it, and it had Dig Dug 2 on it, but it didn't have the first one for some reason. Despite me personally thinking Dig Dug 2 is a superior game due to its unique gameplay and strategy, it's also significantly more accessible in regards to difficulty, and it has a much smoother difficulty curve. The game actually didn't do as well as the first. Besides selling decently well, it was largely unsuccessful. I can't find exactly why this is the case, but some say it may be because of the lack of free movement that the first game had. I wish this game did a lot better than it did. Very few Namco collections even have it, and if you want to play it on modern hardware, you're out of luck. I was actually starting to think that this game was just a figment of my imagination until I wrote pooped in the script, what the fuck, until I popped in my Namco Museum DS copy into my 3DS for this video. And lo and behold, there it is. Ever since writing this video, I've been playing this game quite often, and if you can manage to find a collection with this game in it, it's definitely worth your time. Just 1 year later, Namco released a remake of the first game called Dig Dug Arrangement that was released in a Namco Classic Collection for the arcade, which had a multitude of remakes for some of Namco's biggest hits, Dig Dug being one of them. Aside from the obvious overhaul in graphics, the main gameplay has been changed quite a bit. You can still dig and buff up enemies like before, but there are new power-ups, such as pumps that make your pump faster and stronger, a fucking
gun,
and a rod that turns you into a
god, and you summon meteors from the heavens above.
There are also new enemies like robots, these alien-looking creatures, yellow Fygar, red Fygar, purple Fygar, not purple Fygar. Yeah, this purple imposter guy can inflate you just as you do to him. Sort of poetic if you think about it. One thing that's super cool about this game is the introduction to a unique environment, such as Egypt, a factory, and the fucking moon. There's also boss fights in this game, and they're quite unique. Well, as unique as shooting a gun can be. But this one actually requires a strategy, needing you to blow up these robots in the boss's face to do damage. This is actually the start of Dig Dug remakes that we were to see in the foreseeable future. In fact, there's only one entirely new game that isn't a remake from now on, but we'll get to that later. This is by far one of the best ways to experience Dig Dug. Unfortunately, there isn't a single collection that I'm aware of that has this version of the game in it. So if you want to play this game officially without having to resort to emulation, you'll have to find yourself the original arcade cabinet, which I'm sure won't be cheap. This game is incredibly fun, and it actually has an ending unlike the previous two. It even says you're a skilled gamer once you beat it, but I'm really not. All I did was make it think select is inserted in the coin, and I could play as long as I want. 2001 is around the time 3D games became immensely popular. If your game wasn't 3D, it wasn't as likely to succeed, let alone be worth noticing by the general public. Namco brought quite a few of their franchises into 3D, the most notable was Pac-Man via the Pac-Man World games. Namco wanted to bring Dig Dug into the 3D realm as well, and with the brilliance that was Pac-Man World, you think a 3D Dig Dug game could bring just as much creativity and fun that Pac-Man World brought to the table. Yeah, well, keep thinking that. Dig Dug Deeper was released for the PC in 2001 to underwhelming reviews. I'd say this is the start of the downfall for the Dig Dug franchise, and you'll see what I mean. But first, let's go to the title screen. And oh god! Dude! What the fuck?! Yeah, we're not off to a good start. I can see what they were going for Taizo's design to make it what I assume is a more Western style, but it just looks so gross. I mean, just look at that chin! The first level you see that you take control of the character within a 3D plane, with no camera movement in the slightest. You're supposed to find these holes and go into them to start the gameplay type that you'll be dealing with for the most of your playthrough. The objectives is still the same as the previous games, which is to defeat the enemies, which is a lot more horrific in this game. Occasionally, if you're able to kill an enemy via a world prop such as a rock, you'll be rewarded with a power-up, most of which are pretty useless other than this one that allows your pump to snake around the environment. If an enemy manages to escape, you'll be required to defeat it in the overworld, but this didn't really happen much when I played it. Once you beat the first world, you'll see that you're actually traveling planet to planet, which normally would grant the developers the ability to create unique environments for the player, but nope, they're very boring and incredibly bland to look at. Also, the animations of the enemies look really weird. When they're going left or right, it looks fine, but they don't rotate when going up or down, and it looks strange. Speaking of movement, the player's movement is kind of jank. I would be pressing a direction and Taizo would not go where I wanted him, and he'd go somewhere else, and this caused me multiple deaths. If there's one good thing I can say, it's that this is by far the easiest Dig Dug game so far, but this doesn't really save it. The game is incredibly boring, and unless you're a huge Dig Dug fan, it's not worth your time. I didn't even bother finishing it. Just play Dig Dug Arrangement. And speaking of Dig Dug Arrangement, here's Dig Dug Arrangement!
What did you say?
No, this is not the same Dig Dug Arrangement as before. See, in 2005, Namco released the Namco Museum Battle Collection for the PSP, which had new remakes of Namco's biggest hit arcade games. Despite being another remake of Dig Dug, just like the previous two, this is by far my favorite one. Visually, this game looks great, and the environments are the best they've ever been in the franchise, and there's a ton of new twists to make each level feel unique. There are tons of new enemies such as this one that looks like a rock, and this one that even carries one. There's even one that digs. Mechanically, this is by far the most innovative the Dig Dug franchise has been of yet. There are different ground types, some of which are very easy to dig through, and some of which are very difficult to dig through that cause you to slow down, and some of which you can't even dig through without a power-up. There are foreground elements blocking your view from certain paths and enemies which can certainly catch you off guard, and the bosses are phenomenal. What the fuck? Despite the first boss being relatively safe in regards to mechanics, just needing to puff up the boss a little bit and wait, and then repeat, the later bosses require a lot of thinking, requiring you to strategically drop rocks on their heads, and the last boss even has elements of the first boss, puffing it up and needing to drop rocks on it. This is by far the best version of Dig Dug yet, and it's definitely worth your time needed to play it. The game can get difficult at parts, but the lives don't really matter. Once you run out of lives, your skull restarts back at 0, but you can continue right back where you left off, allowing you to retry all you want. This is an amazing Dig Dug game in the franchise. Now we're at the final Dig Dug game in the series, Dig Dug Digging Strike. Well, actually that's technically not true. After this in 2008, a remake of Dig Dug 2 that was also an MMO release, but the servers went down in less than a year, so unfortunately I won't be able to cover that. And I couldn't find any footage. But luckily, Dig Dug Digging Strike is a great end to the franchise, at least for now. Namco released Dig Dug Digging Strike for the DS in 2005, the same year as the new Dig Dug arrangement came out. But unlike the previous games, this one has a story, and I actually think it's quite cute. The story starts out with Taizo watching TV, but all he sees are sponsorships that use his son Susumu's popularity to sell goods. Wait, son? Yeah, Taizo has a son now, who's actually been around for quite a while, but not as long as Dig Dug though. Susumu is the protagonist of the Mr. Driller franchise, which is a puzzle game released in 1999 in arcades. There's actually a ton of Mr. Driller games, and a significant number more than Dig Dug, a total of 13 games to be exact. My guess is that they were trying to make Dig Dug a more popular character, and connecting it to one of their bigger franchises might have helped with that. Maybe I'll go over Mr. Driller franchise in another video in the future, but for now let's get back to the game at hand. Taizo is very upset that no one remembers him anymore, and when a call comes and requesting help from his son, Taizo gets infuriated and goes to the mission by himself without letting Susumu know about it. Susumu eventually figures out what happened, and it will occasionally help you in the overworld during missions. I bet you didn't expect to be learning about Dig Dug lore today. This is probably a good time to mention the new mechanic in this game. There's an overworld very similar to what was in Dig Dug 2 and Dig Dug Deeper, but unlike those games, there's a giant kaiju on top of it. The goal is to find these holes on the surface to where you then dig into the ground and play in a 2D perspective, reminiscent of the original game. Now you might be wondering, how does one beat the level? Well, you have to drown the giant kaiju on top of the island, but how does one do that? By digging giant stakes in the ground, causing the island to split into pieces, and if you're skilled enough, you can then cause the kaiju to fall down. There are 12 levels in all, which sounds like very little, but all stages are brimming with content and can actually be quite challenging. This game took me 2 hours to beat, with an hour being the most for the previous games. The puzzle of which stakes to dig into the ground and win is quite fun. I'll admit I got stumped quite a few times, requiring me to restart the stage. I don't know where else to place this, so I'm just going to say it here, but I love the art style of this game, and Taizo's design here is my second favorite design by far. I would say though that I wish he didn't have this goatee, and it would have been my favorite design otherwise, but oh well. Upon reaching the final stage, you learn that these underground people were cooking monsters, which caused these kaiju to wake up and go berserk. Not much comes from this though, other than waking up the big bad kaiju that you must defeat. Once you beat the game, you get a final cutscene where Taizo is thrown a party in his name, but unfortunately the press only cares about Susumu, just making Taizo angry again. Poor guy just can't catch a break. Making this video was a ton of fun. I always loved Dig Dug as a kid, and it was fun to play through his game history. What do you guys think? Do you guys think he'll give his games a chance, or do you think they just aren't for you? Let me know down in the comments. Hopefully Namco will bring him back one day. I think there's a lot of potential in the series, and Dig Dug Digging Strike really put a great spin on the formula. But for now, I'll see you guys in the next video.